it's a moving target. I think it's very tricky, and because it's so difficult to create this kind of balance, because what we're looking for, it does not exist, and maybe it cannot exist. But what we're looking for is, at least for some groups, the experience of having that sense of being there. Of course, it's very constructed. Of course, it's mediated, but nevertheless. Peter called it this moment of revelation. Yeah, absolutely, and then how much can that moment be turned into a self-reflexive, self-critical experiences? I looked at the chat, and many of the arguments that Felix Zimmermann has used, I think, are very relevant in this case, where this balancing act is extremely tricky to have the players still be in that world, but have also a sense of frustration at the same time. How much can that be done without destroying the sense of being there, or does it have to be afterwards? I think we know very little about it. And I want to relate this to another point that has come in the chat. That is the question of economics. I think it's very important for us to realize and emphasize again, we know this, that so far, nobody has really tried with big money to create a Holocaust game, because people are hesitant, because the financial risks, the political risks are too big. And therefore we are at the beginning of this process of, and until somebody with significant resources has tried to develop a game that is both immersive and has that kind of experience and the texture to it, and the kind of haptic pleasure attached to it, and at the same time has a self-critical edge to it, works with frustration. As long as nobody has tried, it's very tricky for us to know if it's possible and how would it work. We have to go into the risk of that. And so we need a combination. That's another topic that came under the risk in the chat. We need a combination of different stakeholders, of course, game design, but also historians, also people in history didactics. We need to bring people to the table who have very different perspectives. That hasn't been done yet, and that will be very interesting when it might happen.
Thank you, Wolf. And I just want to make an obvious point that we just lost one person. There's 105 people in this Zoom talk, to many of whom come from all these different contexts. What could happen if we all put our heads together? And part of the big digital Holocaust memory project, is that a project? It's just growing and growing into many different things at the moment that I'm trying to develop, is to bring people together. And it would be great to carry on these conversations and spam my email account if those of you that are interested. I know I've already spoken to many of you here. Everyone else on the panel, did you have any response to these big ideas about self-activity and immersion?
I can speak to something that Wolf was saying, and I think Felix in the chat. Going back a long time to my MA thesis, I was writing about Wolfenstein: The New Order, and particularly Camp Belcea. And if I recall rightly, there's this kind of presentation of player choice, in that you don't have to, but you can go off on a kind of mini level within the game and retrieve some medicine for someone who is suffering in the barracks. And I think you can choose to do that or you don't, but if you do, you go on this big ordeal and then you go back and the person's already died in the barracks anyway. And it's this really weird kind of moment where, like, you did something and the game didn't reward you in a way, but it also speaks to, the reality of the barracks themselves, and maybe, regardless of what you do, this person would have died. But again, it kind of goes straight back into main gameplay, which I think Felix said. But it kind of chimes with what I was saying about Call of Duty, in the sense that, they are kind of isolated camp experiences, but how much frustration we feel through this kind of limited play, I'm not sure, what that does in terms of our reactions to it. But yeah, it was just an anecdote, really.
Thank you.
Can I? Yeah. Can I also? Yeah. Well, I would say so. If we're talking about the broader tension, and I hope that connects well enough. So the tension between immersion and critical engagement, right? I think that ultimately, because of the hypertextuality of what a game is, we can just throw both together. We don't have to force players to do anything. We can just let them play it, but the potential is there. So we have the immersive potential where people are playing Call of Duty and they're engaged in the story and all of that. But if you would then add these complementary materials that I was talking about, those are not things that players have to engage with, but it is there. And the fact that it is there creates the openness, the space for people to go and look at it if they would want to. And if they then do that, you can add a critical perspective to it in a very open-ended manner that leaves the agency up to the player. I think that that's something that I'm very interested in that combination, the immersiveness and the critical in an open-ended way. That's what I would add, I guess.
Maybe adding another thought, because I think very often when we think about playing or gaming the Holocaust, we always come back to an idea of a game creating the past setting. But what I, for example, would find quite interesting is a game about memory culture itself and how it has developed. I think that would be an interesting way, because I believe this, I come back to the responsibility again, but I guess it's so for future generations or for people to perceive themselves as responsible, I think they have to feel empowered. So making an impact, they have to become invested. And I think it would be so interesting offering a game where the choices you make, you really feel, for example, an impact in negotiations of memory culture. It already is, it's a discourse that goes on for ages now. It's a really long time and it's still so persistent. And I think that is quite interesting. So getting people to actually working on the core, what are the goals? Where is it supposed to go? Like Wolf presents, maybe we can use the frame and just approach different problems, or even Peter when he introduced the Paper Please game. So where are the connecting dots? What might be a route that people want to take? And giving them a space of playing that out. I think, for example, that might also add an interesting perspective.
Thanks, Abel. I think that's a really interesting point. And I think kind of Attendant 1942 kind of gets close to that way, but it's not there. It's still kind of role playing. You're playing someone and you're trying to find out bits of a history that's related to you, and you rub some people up the wrong way, and so they won't speak to you anymore about things. And it's an interesting thing about the sensitivities and politics about talking about the past in different contexts. But I think certainly that's having a game about memory culture and the evolutions of memory culture and the kind of the temporal and the spatial. I'm really interested in what we can do with digital technologies to have these constant ever emerging layers.